The diner was packed, the hum of conversation blending with the clinking of silverware and the occasional hiss of a coffee machine. It was the kind of place where regulars came for comfort food and small talk, where the staff knew your order before you even sat down. That's why, when he walked in, it felt off. The man didn't belong here, not in his black hoodie, his worn-out jeans, and his quiet, almost hesitant posture. He wasn't like the usual truckers or families passing through. He was alone, his face partially hidden by the hood. The waitress, a woman in her late 20s with sharp eyes and an even sharper attitude, barely spared him a glance. It had been a long shift, and the last thing she needed was another customer taking up space, especially one who looked like he had no business being here. With a sigh, she grabbed a menu and walked over, forcing a tired smile. "Tables reserved," she said flatly before he could even sit. "We're full." The man looked around, his gaze settling on the empty booths by the window. His voice was calm, almost apologetic. "It's all right. I don't mind waiting." But she wasn't in the mood. She had seen men like him before, the quiet ones, the ones who lingered too long and left bad tips if they paid at all. She shook her head. "Look, buddy, I don't know what you want, but we don't do handouts. There's a shelter 2 blocks down if you're looking for food." For a moment, he just stood there, as if processing her words. Then, with a small nod, he turned to leave. She watched him go, feeling nothing but relief. Then, the bell above the door jingled, and a couple sitting near the counter turned toward her, wide-eyed. One of them let out a low whistle. "You do know who that was, right?" The waitress frowned. "Some homeless guy?" The man laughed, shaking his head in disbelief. That was Keanu Reeves. Her stomach dropped, and in that moment, she knew. She had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She stood frozen, the words echoing in her head. That was Keanu Reeves. The name alone carried weight, making her stomach twist with something between shock and disbelief. Her hands tightened around the menu she still clutched. No, it couldn't be. That man, he looked nothing like a Hollywood star. No security detail, no designer suit, nothing about him screamed celebrity. He had just looked normal. But the hushed whispers spreading through the diner told her everything she needed to know. The couple at the counter wasn't the only ones who had recognized him. A man at a nearby booth pulled out his phone, scrolling rapidly. His eyes darted up at her before he leaned over to his friend, showing something on the screen. The friend's eyebrows shot up. A few others started murmuring, looking toward the door where Keanu had just walked out. The weight of their stares pressed against her like a judgment she couldn't escape. Her manager, a woman in her late 40s who had been working at the diner for over 2 decades, appeared from the back, wiping her hands on a towel. "What's going on?" she asked, eyeing the shifting energy in the room. The couple at the counter answered before the waitress could. "She just turned away Keanu Reeves." The manager's face barely changed, but there was something sharp in her eyes now. "Tell me you didn't." The waitress forced out a scoff, trying to defend herself. "I mean, how was I supposed to know? He looked like some guy off the street." The manager's lips pressed into a tight line. "So that's how you decide who gets a table?" Her chest tightened. She knew what was coming and she hated it. The scolding. The lecture about treating all customers with respect, no matter how they looked. But what hit harder wasn't her manager's disappointment. It was the way the customers were now looking at her. The amused smirks. The barely concealed judgment. It wasn't just a mistake. It was her mistake. And in a world where every embarrassing moment could be caught on camera, she had a sinking feeling that she was about to become famous for all the wrong reasons. Her thoughts were interrupted by the ding of the bell. Another customer was coming in, but she barely noticed. Because across the diner, the man with the phone had just hit record. The shift was immediate. The moment the phone started recording, everything changed. She could feel it, like the entire atmosphere of the diner had turned against her. The same customers she had served for months, even years, now looked at her differently. Some whispered, others smirked. A few shook their heads, their expressions, caught somewhere between amusement and quiet judgment. Her heart pounded. She had seen this happen before, stories that started small, just a misunderstanding or a bad moment, and then spiraled out of control. Viral videos, outrage, strangers online picking apart every second of a clip, turning someone's worst moment into their entire identity. And now she was the main character. She turned back to her manager, who was no longer just disappointed. She looked angry. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Her voice was low, controlled, but it cut through the air like a knife. The waitress tried to defend herself. "I didn't know it was him." The manager's expression didn't soften. And if it wasn't, would it have made a difference? That one hit harder than she expected. She wanted to argue, to say that yes, of course it would have made a difference. But the truth sat heavy in her chest. If it had been anyone else, just a regular guy who looked like he didn't belong, she wouldn't have thought twice about turning them away. She swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to." The manager exhaled sharply. "I don't care what you meant. I care about what happens next." And then, like clockwork, it did. The man with the phone finished recording and looked up at her, a smug smile on his face. "You might want to check Twitter." The words sent a cold chill down her spine. She pulled out her own phone, fingers shaky, as she tapped open the app. And there it was, a video, less than a minute long, captioned, "Waitress refuses to serve Keanu Reeves. What happened next will shock you." It already had thousands of views. Her stomach dropped. She didn't even need to hit play. She knew exactly what the video showed. Her standing there, arms crossed, dismissing a man who had done nothing but politely ask for a table. No context, no second chances. Just one moment, frozen in time, spreading across the internet faster than she could even think. The comments were already rolling in. Wow, the arrogance. She didn't even give him a chance. And this is why I hate people who judge others by how they look. She just threw away the best tip of her life. Keanu is literally the nicest guy ever. This is so messed up. Her breath came short and fast. This couldn't be happening. She looked up, hoping for some kind of support, but the people around her weren't allies anymore. They were spectators, watching, waiting, for the downfall they had already decided was coming. Her hands clenched at her sides. She had two choices. She could run, walk out the door, quit before her manager had the chance to fire her, delete her social media, and hope that in a few weeks, the world would find someone new to cancel. Or she could fight back, not with excuses, not with anger, but by making this right. The decision hit her all at once, fast and final. She grabbed her apron, threw it on the counter, and bolted for the door. Because Keanu Reeves was still out there, and she wasn't going to let this be the way it ended. She pushed through the diner's doors, the cool night air hitting her like a shock to the system. Her heart pounded as she scanned the street, searching for any sign of him. For a man like Keanu Reeves, disappearing wasn't hard. He wasn't the type to make a scene, and after the way she had treated him, she wouldn't blame him for wanting to leave without looking back. Panic clawed at her throat. What if he was already gone? What if she had lost her only chance to fix this? Then, just down the sidewalk, she saw him. He hadn't gone far. He stood near the curb, hands in his pockets, waiting patiently, as an older woman struggled with her grocery bags. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, taking some of the weight from her arms, flashing her a small, kind smile as he helped her to her car. Her stomach twisted. This was the man she had dismissed. This was the man she had judged, not someone looking for a handout, not someone trying to take up space, just a man who saw the world differently, who lived without ego, who treated strangers with kindness even when he had been treated unfairly himself. The realization hit her hard. She had spent her life believing she was good at reading people, that she could take one look at someone and know who they were, but she had been wrong. And now, the whole world knew it. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Another notification. Another comment. Another reminder that people she had never met had already decided who she was. She ignored it. This moment wasn't about them. She took a deep breath and walked forward. As she approached, Keanu turned slightly, noticing her. There was no anger in his expression, no frustration, just quiet curiosity. She swallowed hard. I'm sorry. She expected a dismissive nod, a polite, meaningless exchange before he walked away for good, but instead, he did something that threw her off completely. He smiled, a real, genuine smile, like he had already forgiven her before she even got the words out. "You don't have to apologize," he said, his voice as calm as it had been in the diner. "You were just doing what you thought was right." The words stung more than if he had been upset, because she knew he meant them, and she knew they weren't true. She shook her head. "No, I was wrong. I made a snap judgment, and it wasn't fair. I should have treated you like any other customer." He tilted his head slightly, considering her words. "That's all anyone wants," he said simply. She let out a shaky breath. I don't know if you've seen, but someone recorded what happened." Keanu nodded. "I figured." Her throat tightened. "It's going viral." There was no flicker of panic, no frustration in his face. Just an understanding nod, as if this wasn't the first time someone had tried to twist a moment into something bigger than it was. "You can't control what people decide to believe," he said gently. She exhaled sharply. "Yeah, well, they believe I'm the worst person alive right now." Keanu chuckled, the sound warm and completely unexpected. "Trust me," he said, "the internet has a short memory." She wanted to believe that, but she also knew how brutal people could be, how a single mistake could follow you for years. Keanu seemed to read the doubt on her face. "What do you want to do about it?" The question caught her off guard. What did she want? Did she want to go back and yell at the man who had recorded her? To try and explain herself to people who had already made up their minds? No. She wanted to do what she should have done from the start. She squared her shoulders. "Can I buy you dinner?" For a moment, Keanu just looked at her. Then the corner of his mouth lifted in a small, knowing smile. "Only if you let me leave the tip." She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Deal." Together they walked back toward the diner. Inside, the energy shifted the second they stepped through the door. The manager's eyes widened. The man with the phone, still sitting at the counter, stared at them like he had just seen a ghost. The whispers started immediately. But she didn't care. She grabbed a menu, led Keanu to the best table in the house, and for the first time in hours, she felt like she had taken back control of her own story. Because tonight, the world had decided who she was. But now, she had the chance to prove them wrong. The diner was silent. Every eye was on them as she handed Keanu Reeves a menu. The moment felt surreal, like the world had flipped upside down in the span of an hour. The man who had recorded her earlier still sat at the counter, his phone lying face down next to his plate. He wasn't recording anymore. He was just watching, his smug confidence replaced with something else: uncertainty. The customers whispered among themselves, but no one knew what to say. She had made her decision. Now she had to own it. She took a deep breath, turning to Keanu with a steady voice. "Can I get you something to drink?" A small smile crossed his lips. "Coffee, please." Just like that, the spell was broken. The tension eased, the air shifted, and suddenly, the diner wasn't a courtroom anymore. It was just a place where a man ordered coffee and a waitress did her job. She could feel her manager watching her, waiting for a sign that she had learned something from all of this. And maybe she had. Maybe the biggest lesson wasn't about who Keanu Reeves was. Maybe it was about what it meant to see people for who they really were, not just who she assumed them to be. As she poured the coffee, she felt her phone buzz again. She ignored it. Keanu noticed. Still going viral? She let out a breath. shaking her head. I don't even want to look. His expression was thoughtful. You should. She hesitated. Then, carefully, she pulled out her phone, and what she saw made her heart stop. The video was still trending, but something had changed. Someone, Keanu himself, had responded. She tapped on the comment, eyes widening as she read, "People make mistakes. It's how we learn from them that matters. Be kind." And just like that, the narrative had shifted. The replies beneath his comment were completely different from the outrage she had seen earlier. If Keanu forgives her, then we should too. I respect that she owned up to it. We all judge people sometimes. This is why Keanu is the best. He handled this with so much class. Her hands were shaking, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from relief, because she had been given something not many people get when the internet decides to turn on them. A second chance. She swallowed hard, looking up at him. Why did you do that? He took a sip of his coffee, then met her eyes with a quiet kind of wisdom. Because I know what it's like to be judged by people who don't know you. She felt a lump form in her throat. He wasn't just talking about her. He was talking about the industry, about the assumptions people had made about him, about his career, about his personal tragedies, and he had chosen, over and over again, to rise above it. She realized then that justice wasn't about revenge. It was about doing the right thing, even when no one else does. The man at the counter, the one who had started all of this, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He wasn't smiling anymore. His phone screen was still open, the comment thread showing that his attempt to humiliate her had completely backfired. The customers weren't praising him, they were calling him out. Imagine recording a video just to ruin someone's life. This guy just wanted attention. Keanu handled it way better. If you're still mad at the waitress after this, then you're the problem. He set his phone down, reached for his wallet, and quietly left a few bills on the counter. Then, without another word, he stood up and walked out. The irony wasn't lost on her. He had come here expecting to tear someone down for clicks. Instead, he was the one walking away in shame. Keanu finished his coffee, then pulled out his own wallet and placed a crisp $100 bill on the table. "For the service," he said with a wink. Her lips parted. He held up a hand, stopping her. "I know you'll make sure it goes to the right place." And somehow, she knew exactly what he meant. It wasn't about the money. It was about what she did with it. As Keanu stood up, stretching his arms, the rest of the diner finally started to return to normal. Conversations picked up. The energy shifted back to what it had been before the chaos. But she knew nothing would be the same for her after this. She had made a mistake, but she had also made it right. And as she watched Keanu Reeves walk out the door, no cameras, no entourage, just a man going about his life, she made herself a silent promise. To be better. To see people, not just assumptions. And to never forget the lesson that had changed her life in a single night. Because tonight, she had been the villain of the story, but thanks to one act of kindness, she had been given the chance to rewrite it.